Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Loki Season 2, Episode 6, the season finale and perhaps series finale, episode titled Glorious Purpose, which, yes, was the title of the first episode of the series because we have come full circle with a brilliant, somber finale that finally fulfills Loki's purpose. This was one of the most beautifully written and designed stories to ever come out of Marvel Studios, and I'm going to break it down piece by piece to illuminate the hidden meaning, the details you missed, some questions you might still have, and to celebrate and appreciate this glorious series. Breaking down each episode of Loki has been so rewarding for me, and I just really appreciate you guys sticking with me week after week. Thank you. Also, I am super excited for New Rockstars live show this Thursday, November 16th at Braindead Studios in Los Angeles. You gotta be there. Since my Loki theories and Mephisto and WandaVision got debunked this week, New Rockstars is forcing me to go on a public apology tour. I'm not kidding. Ticket info in the description. And yes, I am wearing our Obi-inspired We're All Gonna Die shirt, which is the best way to support us here at New Rockstars. You can get it at nerdride.shop. Okay, in the previously on section, the first clip we open with is this.
I am Loki of Asgard, and I am burdened with glorious purpose.
This is the first time we heard Loki say these words in the MCU, and man, look at this guy. Just look at how far we have come. As this episode forms a bookend for the series, the opening Marvel Studios title card reverses. And I love the new impact we get from this reversed MCU imagery, like T'Challa's impact shockwave condenses into him, the Avengers glide backward through the quantum tunnels, reversing the time heist of Endgame. It's like all of MCU history is capable of being reversed. And yes, we here at New Rockstars did reverse this back to the normal direction so that we could try to listen for any Paul is dead audio secrets that they might have snuck in there. Roll it. This show is here. Oh my God. I'm just kidding. I just did that. It really is just the music reversed and I added the Mephisto stuff. Or did I? We begin in the glow of the sacred timeline, seen from an angle we've never seen before. Now, composer Natalie Holt includes this chanting choir. I think this might be the Norse poetic Edda Lokasena that Natalie Holt tweeted about in recent weeks, which is an epic poem in which Loki curses the other gods for bringing about the Ragnarok apocalypse with their vices. Loki in this episode will avert Ragnarok for his friends by creating an Yggdrasil world's tree of his own. We see the words "for all time always" etched on the outside of the door, and we glide in through the windows to find ourselves back at the events at the end of episode 4.
Time to be brave.
Loki has time slipped back into his younger self. Now, this is significant because every other time Loki has time slipped, his body has been detached and he sees a past version of himself set on its own destined life path. Like he's just kind of a witness to his own history. But here, this time, Loki time slips his consciousness back into his own body. It's consciousness displacement, a distinct type of time travel that I've identified in the past. It's the kind that Wolverine goes through in X-Men Days of Future Past and what Desmond goes through in Lost. This means that Loki is now in control of his destiny, or so we think. Loki says they need to get Timely out of there, but Victor has already suited up, so Loki for this loop just kind of has to observe and judge how best to alter the next loop. This time we see Victor run out from the side. And now the strand just kind of float back through the door, and I love that big vent just kind of goes slack to let us know that he's dead. Loki asks OB,
What could we have done differently?
We took too long.
Yes, this needle drop is a fifth of Beethoven, Walter Murphy's 1976 disco arrangement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, famous from the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. Beethoven's Fifth is also known as the Fate Symphony. Its opening notes historically considered to be fate knocking at the door. This comes from Beethoven's secretary, Anton Schindler, who wrote after Beethoven's death. The composer himself provided to these dips when one day, in this author's presence, he pointed to the beginning of the first movement and expressed in these words the fundamental idea of his work, thus fate knocks at the door. And so this next sequence shows Loki struggling to fight that fated knock at the door that delivers helping after helping of spaghetti. Since Natalie Holt obviously loves disco from her episode 2 1977 disco rendition of the series theme, we just get to watch Jonathan Majors die over and over to Walter Murphy's swanky disco beat. And I love how the editing makes it seem like it is Loki himself commanding the DJ to kick up the tempo.
Faster.
Okay, no time to argue.
So in loop 2, Loki takes over for OB to brief Victor and hurries him down the steps. Now Victor passes through the briefest purple light. Even this journey, we learned from He Remains later, was paved by the purple guy. Loop 3, Loki tries to go even faster and discovers that there's a microphone that he can use to direct Victor, but Victor dies again. Now Loki says,
Not faster.
Is it over?
Earlier.
So loop 4, Loki goes back to the war room a few minutes earlier in episode 4's timeline. This would be a scene that we didn't actually see in the episode. Shortly before, we cut back to Victor showing Ravonna, Brad, and Miss Minutes how the throughput multiplier worked when Brad was already sitting on the table. But here Victor says,
Ms. Ravonna, after what happened in my work...
Miss Minutes.
I think he was about to call out Miss Minutes for trying to make a move on him back in the workshop. Loki tells Miss Minutes,
I know right now you're hurt and you're angry, but we need your help in finishing the throughput multiplier faster.
yeah, that confused little blink sound effect. It's just so great. Loki watches Victor go again to his death, and the word skin is still traced in the dust by Mobius from episode 1. Loop 5, this time he has Sylvie instead of Casey dragging Victor back into the loom room. Maybe Sylvie made faster work of Renslayer and Brad. Loop 6, we see the loom explode and Loki just pounds on the door. Loop 7, Victor spaghettifies because he opened the door before he put his helmet on or picked up the multiplier. Loop 8, same deal. There's no headgear, he's not holding the multiplier. And then loops 9 through 11, we see 3 deaths, 2 of them with no helmet, 1 with. So loop 12, Victor actually makes it out a few steps, but then falls to his knees, and look at this death. The skin peels off of his skull and jawbone from the bottom up, and it looks like the guy just opened the Ark of the Covenant. So the next loop, Loki goes all the way back to when Victor was first introduced to OB in the RNA department. Loki jumps straight to that model of the loom that OB had made.
This model is not finished, okay? There's only one coat of paint on this.
Only one coat of paint? I mean, geez, how many times did you need to paint this? Or paint it at all? But yeah, this also builds on this scene's parallel to Doc Brown's model of Hill Valley Town Square in Back to the Future, which he told Marty McFly he didn't have time to paint. Loki says the figurine looks like Mobius, but it's actually Victor Timely, which is a great callback because in episode 4 they argued over whether it looked more like Mobius or Loki, and Loki just has to win the argument now. Loki speedily walks through it.
Gonna take some doing? It's not gonna be easy. A lot of temporal radiation. Everybody following?
Yes.
Good.
Yes, they all respond at the same time. This kind of comedic timing totally reminds me of another Christopher Lloyd classic from the 80s, Clue.
And to make a long story short, too late.
Loki asks OB how long it will take to learn everything he knows about mechanics, physics, and engineering.
Decades.
Centuries.
And I love the little pneumatic tube sound effect in the background to underscore all of this sinking in for Loki. And then, oof, centuries? This is the most painful time jump title screen since 5 years later in Avengers Endgame. Loki's dilemma here is inspired, of course, by concepts like Groundhog Day. And for the movie Groundhog Day, director Harold Ramis said that Bill Murray's character, Phil Connors, was stuck reliving that day for 10,000 years. And like Loki on this show, Phil Connors reached a similar state of nirvana.
I'm a god.
You're God.
I'm a god. I'm not the god. I don't think.
Unlike Phil, Loki was already a god, and Asgardians and Frost Giants age over the course of 5,000 years anyway, so for Loki, this is kind of like a couple back-to-back COVID lockdowns. So now, super confident, he walks timely through it.
Now, it looks
is that-
lethal. It is absolutely safe. Watch this.
Okay, low.
Your turn. I'll take those. Thank you.
Thank you.
When you're ready.
Ready.
And go.
Yes, he's so smoothly efficient, anticipating Victor's every response, saving every second of time. Mobius starts to say,
Better watch out, OB. Looks like
Someone's coming for your job. That's right. I'm a coming.
Now, this finale doesn't answer it, but if OB was the original builder of the TVA, then yeah, Loki does end up coming for his job by building his new kind of loom. He types in the password super fast, and Loki just knows the password, which I'm gonna assume came from him trying every permutation of password for centuries until he got the right one. This time, the camera swoops in the same way on Victor that it did in episode 4, but instead of the radiation killing him, it just bumps him a bit, and he keeps going. Loki keeps incredibly calm.
What did I tell you? Do not put the multiplier down. It will roll off the gangway. That's right. Well done.
When the green button initially doesn't work, the background behind Victor does depict some purple-colored cracks, which do look like the tears in reality in Spider-Man No Way Home and the reality rift in the Marvels. And it's spoil it was in the trailer. The multiplier fires into the loom, and while the music becomes victorious and everyone cheers triumphantly, if you look at the sacred timeline, it's not actually condensing. When Victor makes it back in, he says,
Pumpkins.
I have no idea why he says pumpkins. I guess there is an old-timey phrase of some pumpkins, which would refer to someone or something impressive, but he just says pumpkins. Like, is he hungry? Does he think Miss Minutes is a pumpkin? Is this like another example of him inventing words like shoddyocracy? But despite their apparent success, the loom begins overloading again, and Victor realizes it's a scaling problem, that you cannot scale for infinite.
It's like trying to divide by 0.
So, in mathematics, when you divide a number by a smaller and smaller number, you approach infinity. Like 10 divided by 2 is 5, by 1 is 10, by 1/2 is 20, by 1/4 is 40, and so on and so on. But we cannot say 10 divided by 0 is infinity because 0 has no multiplicative inverse. That would be a number when divided by itself would equal 1 because 1 over 0 times 0 is still 0. That's why it's kind of a rule in mathematics that cannot be broken. And there's various further reasons why mathematicians can't even like invent a way to bypass this. Loki says,
So no matter how much we increase the throughput, it will never be enough.
Never enough.
And the loom will always fail.
Yeah, before it was Loki who finished everyone else's sentences, but now it's Victor finishing his. Sylvie suggests this all started with her decision, and Loki reluctantly returns to the Citadel, the events of the season 1 finale. We saw Sylvie in slow motion, this same shot in that episode, so it makes for the perfect moment for Loki to slip back to. It's like when we saw it in slow motion before, the show was kind of hinting, hey, we might come back to this. This time he tries for a more convincing speech.
Stop. I've been where you are. I've felt what you feel.
One major difference you may notice in the Citadel is that now the fire in the fireplace causes the room to glow much brighter, whereas in the season 1 finale, the room was much gloomier. I think the difference reflects how Loki is now seeing He Who Remains' true self, though not at first. Sylvie says,
You've been seduced by a throne.
The last thing I want is a throne.
oof, and that is where he ends up. So we get another round of loops, each one ending with Sylvie repelling Loki, and the sound of He Who Remains gasping and saying his final words.
See you soon. See you soon. See you soon.
Now the words feel kind of like a mockery for Loki because He Who Remains knows Loki is going to keep looping back on this. Loki even loops back to the elevator when He Who Remains was eating an apple.
Not what you were expecting,
But just a man.
Flesh and blood. Don't tell me I'm a disappointment.
They cleverly spliced this together with a shot from season 1 episode 6 and then edited it on Majors rubbing his nose to give us this new angle from the side with the actors back in the same wardrobe. It's kind of like in Back to the Future Part 2 when Zemeckis restaged much of the events of the dance in 1955 to shoot it at new angles as Marty loops back on that history. Normally here, after rubbing his nose, He Who Remains anticipates Sylvie preparing to strike him from behind and he taps his master Timpad to hop around the elevator. This time he doesn't even reach for the Timpad. So he must anticipate Loki this time grabbing her arm to stop her. He knows that Loki is time slipping, and I love this little attention to detail to prove that. We now do see Loki getting worn down and dejected until he finally snaps at He Who Remains to do something, and He Who Remains freezes time.
Oh, come on. You're not telling me you haven't learned how to pause time yet.
Of course, as we learn later, Loki does know how to pause time. His frustration in his comment to He Who Remains, we realize later, was actually part of Loki's plan to get He Who Remains to intervene so that they could talk. But He Who Remains does know that this isn't the first time they've had this kind of conversation.
I know about the slipping. And who do you think paved that road?
He Who Remains brags that he never planned to just sit back and let Sylvie kill him. He knew that it would lead to Loki slipping through time, putting Loki in a position to think he could save the TVA so that Loki would inevitably slip back here so the men could talk. He Who Remains suggested that he even include Loki into this in their first meeting if Loki was listening carefully.
I told you. Reincarnation, baby.
But come on, He Who Remains. He Who Remains said reincarnation, baby, in a very different context.
You plunge your blade in my chest and an infinite amount of me start another multiversal war, and I just end up right back here anyways. Reincarnation, baby.
Yeah, before he suggested it was going to be another Kang who would end up right back here. Now he's saying he, literally this variant, would have never left the chair, and Loki's need to time slip to loop back would, in effect, respawn him. But then we get to the most important exchange in this scene. Loki takes a moment and then tells He Who Remains, as if testing him,
We die with the dying. We're born with the dead.
Uh-huh.
Ooh, for the first time, Loki has said something that threw off He Who Remains. I don't think he knows this reference. This is a line from T.S. Eliot's poem, Little Gidding, which is the fourth part of T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets. The fuller passage is, "We die with the dying, see they depart, we go with them. We are born with the dead, see they return and bring us with them." Little Gidding is a town in England, and the poem is about a narrator who meets a ghost who's a combination of various poets and literary figures. T.S. Eliot is saying that humanity can only avoid war by learning the lessons of the past, and it says that we're only saved by understanding the unity of the past, present, and future. You can see how this applies to what Loki's going through. You can only prevent multiversal war by learning lessons from the past. In my deep dive of Christopher Nolan's Interstellar, I pointed out that one of the books that Nolan handpicked for the all-important bookshelf is Selected Poems by T.S. Eliot. Christopher Nolan actually said of these poems, quote, "Concepts of time and space at their most complex are sometimes best expressed through art rather than science. Eliot's 4 quartets are as thought-provoking about time as any scientific text." And the first of those 4 quartets is actually T.S. Eliot's Burnt Notion, which opens with, "Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past." A theme that applies to the grandfather paradox that gets presented in the Tesseract of Interstellar, but also to the type of time travel that this season of Loki is presenting. By the way, T.S. Eliot's having a big weekend in Marvel. Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cats was based on poems by T.S. Eliot, Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, and a number from that show has a big moment in the Marvels. But by saying this, Loki is testing He Who Remains. He's reciting this poetry to hint to He Who Remains that he did actually learn some lessons about the past. But Loki recites the line in a way that sounds like they just could be an in-context morbid overture about their doomed status, or maybe the Ragnarok-y cyclical nature of death and rebirth. So He Who Remains hears this and he's just like, I don't know where you're going with that. And since he caught He Who Remains off guard, Loki uses this moment to show his cards.
And what makes you think this is the first time we've had this conversation?
Only now does He Who Remains drop the bullshit and take Loki seriously.
How is Victor Timely?
Yes, for all the criticism Majors got for his over-the-top performance as Victor Timely, you gotta appreciate him doing an impression of himself here. It's not 100% Victor Timely, it's like 55% Victor Timely. Actually now, Majors completely drops all theatricality and speaks plainly.
Scaling problem, that's what he told you? Victor told you it was a scaling problem. Wow. No, there's no problem.
Compared to the impishness he played He Remains with in season 1 episode 6, hopping on the desk and whatnot, this is the first time we've seen a Kang just be chill, which is important because we really need to trust the guy when he finally explains the truth, that the temporal loom is a failsafe. It's only designed to preserve the sacred timeline, and it automatically deletes branches, and if the TVA at that time gets destroyed, no biggie, it's easy to rebuild. So yes, we were right that the TVA has gone through several cycles of destruction. Destruction is just part of its cyclical protocol. Loki responds,
What a waste of time.
Indeed, centuries. But you know what? Not fully wasted, because those centuries primed Loki for the important evolutionary steps he takes this episode. He needs to be divorced from the flow of time. He Who Remains says,
And as you may or may not know, my variants are already out there.
We'll find them.
There's too many.
I won't stop.
Doesn't matter.
Never stopped me before.
I know, champ.
yes, this rapidly edited exchange is the most heroic and Avenger-like Loki has ever sounded. My theory for Secret Wars is that the God of Stories Loki will assemble one team of Marvel heroes to fight against a team selected by Kang Prime. He Who Remains tells him that the equation results in Loki losing, and Loki says, I know, because he and Sylvie had previously realized, do you think what makes a Loki is that we're destined to lose? But then Loki sees He Who Remains equations on the chalkboard, and he says he's gonna change the equation by breaking the loom. He's basically doing what mathematicians did with taking the square root of -1 and calling it I to open a whole new field of mathematics. He's doing that by basically putting 1 over 0 and calling it something new. And for the first time, He Who Remains is on the defensive in this chess match. He assumed Loki's attachments to his friends and to Sylvie would make it impossible for him to live without the sacred timeline. That's why he's dealing with Loki and not with Sylvie. But after centuries, Loki now feels confident that he can build a better timeline management system than He Who Remains loom is. But Loki kinda needs to get approval from his closest friends. First, Mobius. So we return to Time Theater number 25 with Loki back in his prisoner jumpsuit and his collar, Mobius with a can of Josta from the very first episode. Remember, that was also titled Glorious Purpose. Loki now predicts Mobius's whole planned interrogation routine, and he gets to the brass tacks.
How do you choose who lives And who dies?
Yeah, Loki's just here to learn from Mobius because he knows what he's gonna do. Mobius tells a story.
A couple of hunters went out on a mission somewhere near the Black Sea to find a variant who's going to be responsible for 5,000 deaths. They get there, and there's a little hiccup. The variant is an 8-year-old boy.
So the Black Sea is in Eastern Europe, surrounded by Bulgaria, Georgia, Romania, Russia, Turkey, and Ukraine. Could this future murderous boy have grown up to be Victor Von Doom? Latveria's precise location in Eastern Europe has shifted around in Marvel Comics and is usually around Serbia or Romania. So it could be, but I don't know. Victor isn't really known for having a brother. Mobius says that the hunter hesitated, but a couple hunters died, and his partner had to step in and prune the kid. We learned that partner was Renslayer. Remember, she did something similar with young Sylvie, and that would mean that Mobius was the hunter who hesitated. Why did he hesitate at the sight of two brothers playing in the water? Well, maybe because somewhere deep down, he thought about his sons and a jet ski day. Mobius breaks down the weight of I am burdened with glorious purpose.
Most purpose is more burden than glory.
What an amazing deconstruction of a line that has echoed through the MCU for over 10 years. Loki shakes Mobius' hand to thank him for explaining how to live with the burden of being a constant timeline monitor, and Mobius in the room spaghettify, and it's just beautiful. But it contrasts with a painful version of that spaghettification as we return to episode 5, right when Mobius split into strands, and Loki pauses this so that he can talk to Sylvie.
What's happening?
We're outside time.
The sound design here is just really cool. It kind of sounds like a rushing river that we're submerging into. Sylvie deduces that Loki would have to kill her to save the sacred timeline, but she reminds him that the sacred timeline sucks, and he shouldn't want to take away free will if it's to protect that. She goes on.
I grew up in apocalypses, Loki. I've lived through enough of them to know that sometimes it's okay to destroy something.
But then Loki, who has been finishing sentences throughout this episode, realizes there is more to this sentence.
If there's a hope that you can replace that thing with something better.
I love this line, and I love that it's coming up in this series analog of a writer's room with all of A.D. Doug's post-it notes on that board for the story beats. This line from Loki is a difficult choice every writer of fiction has had to face. Sometimes you have to, as they call it, kill your darlings, to toss out an entire storyline or a character or a concept that you work so hard on. But you do it with the hope that if you came up with that thing, you can also come up with something better. Writers just have to know that it's not the thing you created that you have the faith in, it's the creator that still exists inside yourself that was always able to make something new. Eric Martin actually said in an interview that there was originally an entirely different concept that they wrote for episode 5, that was their favorite episode of the season, but the Marvel Studios Brain Trust nuked it because it never would have worked. And Eric Martin agreed with that decision, but he had to spend a whole weekend writing a new script for episode 5, and we ended up getting one hell of an episode. And we're gonna dig into what that mystery nuked episode was in the sneak peek on Sunday. Leaving Sylvie, Loki inhales like he's taking a plunge, and we are back in the loom room right after Victor stuck his head in the head scanner. This time, Loki concedes to Mobius that the figurine wasn't Mobius, it was Loki, and he makes the walk himself, and he locks Sylvie and Mobius out, telling them,
I know what I want. I know what kind of god I need to be. For you. For all of us.
So first off, I love how they framed Sylvie and Mobius in the same window so this way Loki could say it to both of them. But this line echoes the very first Thor film right before Loki dropped off the Bifrost Bridge.
I could have done it, Father! I could have done it! For you! For all of us!
No, Loki.
Back then, Loki wasn't being honest, he was just doing it for himself. But this time, he truly is taking on this burden for those he loves. Loki marches down the gangway, his clothes tear away into a new godly form, a green cloak and a dramatic crown with tall horns. The crown is actually made of the same kintsugi cracked pattern that He Remains Citadel was made out of. As Loki destroys the loom, his face seems to grow older a little bit. It kind of looks like that of Richard E. Grant as classic Loki when in season 1 episode 5 he shouted this episode's title. Remember, when Sylvie's record store spaghettified last episode, she briefly found herself in a dark green void with these dead, dark green vines. and that's where Loki finds himself now. But he realizes by grabbing these dead branches and by not letting them go, he can bring life into them. And by doing that, he creates an opening to the Citadel bedrock. When he steps off the broken gangway, reminding us again of the broken Bifrost bridge that he dropped from in Thor, now, like Indiana Jones taking a leap of faith onto the invisible bridge in The Last Crusade, there is now a path for Loki to walk on. It's a journey into mystery. Now, I have talked about this season how normally in the MCU, when there is a huge effects sequence, we're often looking at a big wash of glowing energy that doesn't seem to have any weight or texture. But in Loki, with the loom, every shot of it has been awe-inducing because we know what it is. This sequence takes that a step further. Without any words or any real logical baseline to understand what the hell is happening here, we just follow the emotion and we go with it and we get it. All we know is that Loki has transformed, and he kind of looks like a beetle crawling through some dark, tangled, dead roots of a tree, that he's wearing some swanky slippers, and that he will not let go, because he is determined to build something new. I don't think we've ever seen visual storytelling this impressionistic in the MCU before, and production designer Kazra Farhani, along with Natalie Holt, Eric Martin, Justin Benson, and Aaron Moorhead, all of them deserve awards for this. Whereas He Who Remains created his sacred timeline by using Alioth to violently devour branches he didn't like, Loki does the work, and he does it by hand. He strains to grab every single vine, no matter how heavy or how strong that tensile strength is, because he doesn't want any branch to die, and he heaves it along his upward climb. We're reminded of Peter Parker holding his arms out in a Christ pose, trying to keep the two halves of the ferry together, or his variant Tobey Maguire Peter Parker trying to keep the train from crashing. We feel the weight, the strain on his arms. And actually, speaking of Christ poses, with Loki's barbed crown, doesn't he kind of seem like Jesus carrying his cross up the hill on a path to be crucified, to die for our sins, to open the gates of heaven? I don't know, if I were to tell Loki this Christian mythology, he'd be like, hey, I'm Loki, the god of stories from Asgard. But notice how the gold and all the kintsugi cracks of that asteroid flow upward with him, forming a path for him to follow. A yellow brick road, you might say. Those cracks were not there to show how the timeline was destined to be broken. They were there because it was broken without the rightful God there to unify everything. And now that he's here, the gold flows into a chair to form a throne for him. But it's not a beautiful Odin-style, perfectly molded throne. It's just kind of a stumpy throne with grooves on the back. Why? To make it easy for the vines to jut upward behind him. We see all this while the architecture of He Who Remains Citadel crumbles away. Loki illuminates all of the vines, becoming his own handheld loom in the heart of the timeline. And as the camera pulls back, it rotates 90 degrees, and it gives us this magnificent shot, a perfect depiction of the Yggdrasil world's tree from Asgardian and Norse mythology. The roots below are dead, but being woven by Loki and the trunk into life. And above, they blossom into the blue and purple ends that used to be part of the broken multiverse. They remain though, now looking like promising fruit, the fruit of his labor. Loki is finally a god of stories with a glorious purpose, or really a glorious burden. He's committed himself to an eternity of solitude. Remember, Agent Coulson once told him that he lacked conviction, but he has found that conviction. He replaced He Who Remains automated loom with an organic, living garden that he actively tills. Rather than pruning branches, he strains to weave every vine in. He has shown that a multiverse can live in harmony, and that multiverse is alive. It can grow, adapt, change, die, and reproduce. So on screen, we see after period, which is just hilarious. Who knows what that means? We see a new poster in the TVA. Let's grow together, nurture our nature for a stable future, with a depiction of the Yggdrasil tree with workers growing it instead of pruning branches like in the past TVA propaganda posters. Now, nature and nurture are commonly seen as opposites, but here they're used in the same sentence. You'll see on the chrono monitor screen, the timeline has now been reoriented 90 degrees. So it's not lateral anymore, but growing upward, and there's room for plenty of branches. In addition to analysts and hunters, there is a new position in the TVA workforce. Workers in these kind of white clothes with these white hats. They kind of look like medical workers or maybe botanists of some kind. I just assume that they're in charge of the health of a given branch, maybe tasked with finding ways to help it grow sustainably. OB reboots Miss Minutes. She appears from her original orange binary look to her cartoon self. They still don't know if she's gonna kill them all. Mobius hands B-15 a case file.
Reports on the variants of He Who Remains.
Do any of them know that we exist yet?
Nope. I guess one of them caused a little bit of a ruckus on 616 adjacent realm, but they handled it, so we're all good for now.
Oh, baby. 616 adjacent realm is referring to the quantum realm of Universe 616, and this ruckus was Kang the Conqueror in the events of Ant-Man the Wasp Quantumania. By saying they handled it, he's referring to Ant-Man, Wasp, Cassie Lang, Hank Pym, and Janet Van Dyne. Actually, those photos in the file show Kang the Conqueror holding out his two fists to blast the freedom fighters when he floated down on that disc from his penthouse. And then the other photo, I think that's Kang's time chair or the ruins of it. Now the risk report form with all the text is kind of hard to make out, but at the top is a variant number and then a name and then a location and then biotemporal aura. Beside that, I think we see the word Kang in quotes, and then beneath that, powers, and then related case files with a bunch of other numbers listed. I think these might be referencing some of the other Kangs in the Quantumania mid-credit scene. The printed text shows something about apprehended for the energy surge. I don't know, folks. I'm gonna keep trying to make out what this says, and if anything big comes out of it, I'm gonna make a follow-up video. But the case file that Mobius requests shows that he is labeled variant number MFF353. M for Mobius, just like Loki's variant number is L1130, but FF353 is a reference to Fantastic Four 353 from the year 1991. This was the issue in which Mobius and Mobius was first introduced as that name. Mobius tells B-15 to leave the past murals up, both the Kang era and the Timekeeper era, saying that those who forget the past are doomed to, you know, which is really the theme T.S. Eliot was getting at in that poem. The war room is now filled with all ranks of the TVA, hunters, analysts, engineers. So there is now another engineer beside OB. We see some judges with their sashes, we see health workers, we see Judge Gamble, as well as that sleepy judge from episode 1, and I think that is the librarian from season 1, episode 2. OB unboxes a TVA handbook, 2nd edition, crediting both Ouroboros and Victor Timely. We see young Victor Timely back in 1868 Chicago continuing to pour wax candles, and he turns around to look at the open window, but nothing comes through it this time. So the kid gets to live a good life, hopefully as a candle maker, to bring some light into the world. Renslayer wakes up in the void. Behind her are the pyramids and the Sphinx that we saw in the void in season 1, episode 5. Remember, we're pretty sure that Sphinx has Jonathan Major's nose and face. Under the grass is the same golden floor emblem that Mobius had just brushed his shoe across, showing the TVA emblem and for all time always. It is stained with bluish marks. Maybe it's some kind of oxidation. Either way, I think the implication here is that the void was one of the past eras of the TVA that he remains allowed to be destroyed when the loom got overloaded, and he used that rubble as Alioth's feeding ground. We see purple light flashing on Renslayer's face, meaning Alioth is approaching, and Renslayer just stares it down, not flinching. Look, folks, I have a hard time accepting this as the end of Renslayer. If it is, I just think her arc this season was really underdeveloped. Like, I still think he remains must have needed her in order to tame Alioth to begin with. And the framing here just reminds me of the moment John Locke on Lost stared down the smoke monster, which is really the beginning of his story. But we have to acknowledge that Eric Martin did tell Cinema Blend, quote, "We approach this as like two halves of a book. Season 1, first half, Season 2, we close the book on Loki and the TVA. So if we don't get a Season 3, I'm okay with that, but I would love to see Renslayer holding the reins of Alioth in some Marvel title in the future." Mobius watches as his non-variant self plays with the kids.
The inmates are running the asylum! Okay, peace.
With the TVA under its own control, the former prisoners are running the asylum. Sylvie says,
It's weird that Loki's not here, isn't it?
Yeah, but he is there, because notice how the lens flare causes this frame to be filled with green and golden hues. Mobius says he's just gonna wait here for a little bit.
Let time pass.
I love it. Mobius has been in the TVA for eons, outside of time, just kind of treading water in time. And now he's gonna let it actually pass and let that current take him wherever it goes. But you know he's got his eye on that red skidoo poking out of the garage. It's calling his name. But Mobius's words of "let time pass" echo through Loki's timeline tree. Each vine, you'll notice, is filled with different strands of colors, each representing a whole different universe, all allowed to coexist in harmony. God of Stories Loki absolutely heard the words "let time pass," and that is what he is doing. His greatest fear that he told Sylvie about last episode was being alone, but he has overcome that fear by realizing he was afraid of something else, that his friends might not have the chance to be alive and to be free. For someone who has lived centuries of life, what could be a more glorious purpose than that? The final casting director photo shows Sylvie from the train in season 1, episode 3, B-15 from season 1, episode 2, Casey from the check-in desk from the very first episode, OB from the first episode of this season, Mobius from the very first episode, and Loki after he sat up in the desert back in the very first scene of this series. This show has just meant so much to me. To be able to nerd out with all of you every week has been such a privilege, and I promise I don't take that for granted. So thank you for supporting New Rockstars. I love you guys. And we still have more videos we want to make about Loki, so please subscribe to New Rockstars and to all the channels in the New Rockstars network to see me face public humiliation for my silly theories about McDonald's Jack or the TVA Soylent Green Pie. What was I thinking? Join us for our live show in Los Angeles on November 16th. Follow me at Erik Voss. Thanks to Noah Chen for helping me research this breakdown. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.